Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending my presentation. I'm very happy ATC is held in Houston this year. If it was on me, ATC would always be held in Texas for the same reason that the Olympics should always be held in Greece, if you ask me. The paper's number is 210365, and it has a very catchy title, Petroleum Engineers Need a Strong Professional Society. Its underlying thesis is to counter this recently emergent rhetoric on rebranding petroleum engineering to energy engineering, and by extension, SPE to Society of Professionals in Energy. And this is something I very much dislike. I find self-limiting, damaging, and self-serving for some people. This here is a list of the 5 subtitles that this paper's manuscript is divided under. As you see, just like in this presentation today, I will start broad and eventually narrow down to petroleum engineering and SPE. There will be a part 2 of some form at some point. I just don't know if it's going to be a deeper look on those topics or a look on other relevant subtopics. We will start by the global energy status quo. This is a plot I built using data from the 2021 BP Statistical Review on the energy consumption mix, the global energy consumption mix for the first year of the last 6 decades, from 1970 until 2020. And because 2020 went down as a weird year, I added a faded bar for 2019 next to it. I divided the energy mix into 3 broad categories. The first one with purple is fossil fuels. Those are coal, oil, and natural gas, and is what they try to make as small as possible. As you see, the consumption of fossil fuels increased by about 150% in the last half a century, with its portion within the energy mix decreasing by about 10%. And this is mostly artificial decrease, I would say. So the world is still dominated very much by fossil fuels. Then you have renewables with orange. Those are geothermal, biofuels, biomass, solar, and wind. And those is what they try to make as big as possible. Nevertheless, you still need a magnifying lens to see the orange portion on the bars. And then you have other with yellow. Those are hydroelectric and nuclear mostly. Now, the dynamic in the energy mix reflected by this plot is not at all reflected by the investments on energy, especially by the public sector. Here we have a plot I built using data from the 31 member countries of the IEA, or the International Energy Agency, not to be confused with the US EIA, the Energy Information Administration. IEA is headquartered in Paris. And I tried to divide the reported public investment in those countries into energy RD&D. RD&D is research, development, and demonstration for them, into the same 3 categories. And you see here, fossil fuels being a minority, then renewables having a higher portion, and others with yellow having the majority of the divide. Others in this plot on the right mean different stuff than the plot on the left. They mean things like carbon sequestration, power transmission, and hydrogen. Nevertheless, you cannot unsee the imbalance between those two plots. Now, a carbon tax scheme is a decades-long proposition about dealing with the presumed adverse impacts on the society by the man-made CO2 emissions. It's been talked a lot over the years. It became a buzzword. It aims at fossil fuels, and but there is not much talk about how, on the specifics on how that will work. This is a plot that shows the basics of a carbon tax scheme. You have the demand curve going from left top to bottom right, and two supply curves. One supply curve on the right without the impact of the carbon tax, and a supply curve on the left with the carbon tax. Clearly, the tax shifts the supply curve to the left, and the impact of that is decreasing the equilibrium quantity of produced CO2 emissions. In effect, that decreases the amount of energy produced, and it increases the prices. Now, developing these tax rates, basically building this second supply curve, requires that you are able to quantify the impact of those CO2 emissions on the society. This is what we call in economics a negative externality, the cost to the third-party cost associated with the consumption of that product. This is what I highlight here, the green triangle. But is there an empirically proven relationship quantifying the impact of man-made CO2 emissions on the Earth's temperature, for instance? No, there is not. That leaves everything into the hands of the government to determine those tax rates that would be used to essentially come up with this second supply curve. This is an extreme form of command and control. The most extreme form of command and control is called communism, when you really don't want to go down this road. But let me show you something that can be quantified. It does have an adverse impact on the society, and the government won't care at all. The governments won't care at all about dealing with. Look at the mineral usage per power generation for solar and wind compared to coal and natural gas. And I shouldn't really have this slide presented at this audience, but I had to, because there are people who claim that solar and wind are winning in the markets. Solar and wind wouldn't exist in a free market. This is another plot I built using data from the BP statistical review. On the vertical axis, you have CO2 emissions, and on the horizontal axis, you have energy consumption per capita. The vertical axis roughly shows how dirty you are seen as, and the horizontal axis shows how wealthy you are on paper. With the cyan and green circles are the global values, and with the dark blue and red squares are the US values. Now, the US values are included in the global values, so that's important. And looking at this plot on a first glance, you are saying, oh my God, the US seems much less CO2 emission incentive than the entire world as a whole. It alludes towards efficiency. But what is more important in this plot is this little U-turn that the US seems to be making around the year 2000. It goes from small increases in CO2 emissions and giant leaps in energy consumption per capita to small decreases in CO2 emissions and big reductions in energy consumption per capita. This to me shows like a very much a nation in a chronic decline. And it's uncertain when this decline started. There was obviously a slowdown and then a decline, but it would be argued when it really started, what is manifested in the year 2000. But my bet would be 1976, and that's the year the last coal-fired power plant was built in the United States. And this is where efficiency comes back into play because there is this thing called the Jevons paradox, which was named after this British economist from the 1800s who says that if you become more efficient in using a commodity, you end up consuming more of that commodity. And this has manifestations in everyday life, in today's life as well. Your house becomes more expensive, more efficient, you buy a bigger house, you buy a vacation house. Your car becomes more efficient, you buy a bigger car, you buy a second car, etc., etc. Now here we see, I think the reverse of the Jevons paradox is also possible. You can become more inefficient by decreasing the consumption of a commodity. But what we see here in the US is that we become less energy rich with associated small decreases in CO2 emissions. And I mean, you can argue that at some point the energy consumption per capita objective becomes the CO2 emission, and that brings this decline. But yeah, this is a very important plot. Now, energy transition is a buzzword that has been used that has emerged fairly recently, but has been used a lot for individual benefits and yeah, personal gains. This is because a crazy outlook on the future is much more entertaining than a realistic, boring one. Everybody has seen this movie, Back to the Future Part 2. And some of you have seen this movie, Metropolis. That's a German silent film era film from the 1927, almost 100 years ago. And both of those films present an outlook on the future that was proven to be very wrong. This is similar to some predictions that are made today. A realistic outlook on the future would be considered very boring. There are no flying cars. We are not running out of fossil fuels. There is continuous fuel decarbonization, which is a slow organic process, and government interference has almost no impact in it. There are no alternatives to hydrocarbon energy in the foreseeable future, which seems that it will be dominated by alternative sources of oil and gas. And now this is the second most important slide of my presentation after the conclusion. This involves a concept which I elaborated on last ATC virtually, but I introduced earlier, I think through a magazine article. And this has to do with the enrollment drops in the petroleum engineering academic programs everybody was whining about in the late 2010s, early 2020s. I believe that they are not down to bad oil prices. I think that bad oil prices is just the catalyst. They are down to bad academic programs, which are a consequence of bad faculty. Now, why do students enroll in petroleum engineering programs? They enroll in petroleum engineering programs to learn how to solve these relevant upstream oil and gas problems. Any other answer to this question would be wrong. They don't enroll to become energy engineers. They don't enroll to belong to the society of professionals in energy. Now, the unfortunate imbibitions of non-oil and gas fashions into petroleum engineering programs and our community in general comes with a very serious associated opportunity cost. In economics, opportunity cost is a cost of a product in terms of next best alternatives. And the alternative that is being sacrificed in this case is expertise onto relevant upstream oil and gas domains. This is what will actually give petroleum engineering graduates the competitive advantage on those traditional petroleum engineering jobs. Crucially, an advantage over non-petroleum engineering degree holders. This is what you go to school for. And I think that this is not happening primarily because of hiring faculty without true affinity or with very low affinity to the petroleum engineering discipline, which is really hurting these programs. In 2017, I had a hunch. So I took the course evaluations from the department I was a student at the time and calculated some average values. And it turns out that my hunch was right because the more relevant the educational and professional background of a course instructor, the more high the course evaluation score would likely be. Now, for the last ATC, I tried to see the status quo in 6 well-reputed petroleum engineering departments in the US. So I built this bar chart showing the percentage of the faculty that had at least 1 degree in petroleum engineering versus the faculty who did not have even 1 degree in petroleum engineering. And the results were weird, but I expected them to be weird, and I elaborated a little bit more last year in my ATC paper in 2021. But for this year, I took a step back. I put all the numbers together. I didn't bother updating them. And some very round percentages came out, 60% to 40%. 40% of this faculty did not have a single degree in petroleum engineering. And I am not claiming that 1 degree in petroleum engineering makes a difference between good faculty or a bad faculty. But for sure, what you see in this plot is quite extreme. And an expectation for every petroleum engineering professor to know where to have a degree in petroleum engineering is not extreme at all. I would expect every petroleum engineering professor, no matter what class he's teaching, to know what connects the standpipe to the swivel and definitely know how many gallons are in 1 barrel. If I get sick, I'm not going to go to an OBGYN. Now, we go to SPE, which is turning 65 years old tomorrow. And SPE is located in a nice place between industry and academia, and it can definitely impact the nexus of the two in a good way through a good set of actions, or in bad way by a negative set of actions. They can reinforce a virtuous cycle that brings growth and development in our community. We talked about the importance of current educators. They need to have relevant background, make impactful research on projects related to petroleum exploration and production, be coherent with industrial trends and needs, generate a supply chain of capable graduates to the industry. Then you have young professionals, which is basically young petroleum engineering graduates. They need to have a strong knowledge on the petroleum engineering basics and fundamentals, require little or no entry-level training, hold a true competitive advantage over non-petroleum engineering graduates on the relevant jobs that they are supposed to be going to them. And I'm not talking about artificial barriers of entry. I'm talking about a true free market advantage. And foreign educated ones should be able to facilitate technology transfer to their countries. I'm highlighting this last point because there are many diversity champions in SPE, and you never hear this in their rhetoric. I guess it's a non-sexy topic. They prefer talking about pronouns and the height of managers, but this is a very important point. And then, of course, you have the future educators that will be the best young professionals, and that will create a situation where good petroleum engineers are teaching the upcoming classes of petroleum engineers, and the focus remains on the future petroleum technology development. And this virtuous cycle can be reinforced by SPE, by SPE being focused on real-world petroleum matters. In conclusion, rebranding petroleum engineering to energy engineering will dilute the domain expertise that petroleum engineers are supposed to have after they graduate from their programs. Non-oil and gas functions should not influence SPE. Expertise on upstream oil and gas matters is where SPE's interests lie, and bad faculty hiring is the cause and consequence of many problems in our world. And SPE's priority should be in serving petroleum engineers and the petroleum engineering discipline worldwide. And with that, thank you very much.